Good morning, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and welcome back to Law and Crime Live. This is where we cover some of the most interesting live trials in the country today. And today, I'm so happy you're joining us. We have a very, very big day for you, and I want to start right away. So let me give you a preview about what we're going to be covering today. Let's first start off in Ohio. As you know, we're going back into the Sean Great case. We're going to be live in that one. Sean Great, 41 years old, is charged with 23 counts. That's right, 23 counts in this indictment, including aggravated murder, and he could face the death penalty. That's right, he's charged in connection with the deaths of Elizabeth Griffith, who was 29 years old, and Stacey Stanley, or I should say Stacey Hicks, who was 43 years old. And he's also charged with the kidnapping and rape of an unnamed woman, which we will call Jane Doe. Her 911 phone call was played yesterday. We've showed it to you. It's really, really a disturbing case when you heard the opening statements by the prosecution detailing what happened when police went to this house of horrors, as I should say. So we are going to continue our coverage of that today. It is a case you do not want to miss. The details are shocking. So again, as soon as we have a live feed in that Ohio courtroom, we will make sure to go to it. But let's step back. Let's go now to the West Coast. We are going now to Las Vegas. As you know, we've also been covering the David Copperfield case out of Las Vegas, the prominent magician, who is on trial. No, he's not on trial. It's a civil trial. He and the MGM Grand are being sued over an audience member who was hurt during one of the magician's acts, the Lucky 13 Disappearing Act. Now, this case, where we left it, court went dark for about a week. Mr. Copperfield took the stand, and he was being grilled. He was being grilled by the plaintiff's attorney. Really, you saw him on the stand for about 45 minutes or so. It is going to continue today, and he has a lot of explaining to do about how this trick went bad. Or was it not his fault, and was it ultimately Gavin Cox? Remember, he's the plaintiff in this case. Was it ultimately his fault? The question is, was this a trip or was this a slip? Whose fault was it? We will cover that here on Law and Crime. But now, ladies and gentlemen, we have to take a step back and talk about what happened yesterday. As you know, we have been covering the Claude Tex McIver case out of Atlanta, Georgia, a prominent attorney who was on trial for shooting and killing his wife, Diane McIver. The defense said this was all a tragic accident, that he did not mean for the gun to go off when he shot her from the backseat of a moving car. The prosecution said this was an intentional killing, that he wanted to kill his wife, and that he had financial gain and a financial motive to do so. He was charged with 5 counts, okay? He was charged with murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a weapon during the commission of a felony, and an influencing witness charge. That's right, the prosecution believed that he tried to tamper the testimony of Danny Joe Carter, the driver in that car. Well, ladies and gentlemen, yesterday, after a very, very long deliberation on the part of the jurors, they came back with a verdict. Take a look.
Juror 20, I would like you please to publish the verdict, which means read the verdict into the record.
On count 1, murder, we find the defendant not guilty. On count 2, felony murder, we find the defendant guilty of felony murder. On count 3, aggravated assault, we find the defendant guilty. On count 4, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, we find the defendant guilty. On count 5, influencing a witness, we find the defendant guilty.
Thank you, Juror 20. You can take a seat. Deputy Murphy, if you would please read the verdict form to Mr. Rutter and then to Mr. Carvey.
For anybody who's been following this case, many people are shocked by that verdict. Again, Tex McIver was not guilty of malice murder, an intentional murder, but he was found guilty of felony murder because he was also found guilty of the felony of aggravated assault, meaning during the commission of that felony, during the commission of that aggravated assault, Diane McIver died. He was also found guilty of possession of a weapon during the commission of a felony and the influencing witness charge. We are going to break down all of this, the legal aspects of it, in a minute. But right now, joining me via Skype is a very special guest. We have with us Bill Crane, This is a prominent political analyst, also a longtime friend of Tex McIver, as well as a key witness in this case. Many of you will recognize him. This testimony was crucial for the state, and it was unbelievable to watch. Joining me right now is Bill Crane. Mr. Crane, great to see you.
Good to be here. Good morning.
Good morning. So I have to ask you the million-dollar question. What is your reaction to the verdict?
I was not surprised that the jury, and I respect their decision in the jury process, found sufficient evidence to convict. I thought they might come back with involuntary manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter and reckless. But I am still among those who believes what happened was a tragic accident without intent. So obviously those of us who've known Tex McIver, the man, for a long period of time have trouble reconciling him intentionally or even accidentally with some intent taking the life of his life, the life of his wife. They live on an 80-acre private lake in a ranch that's outside of the metro area. She frequently rode horseback at night. If they had problems in their marriage, quite honestly, there was another way to try to get rid of his wife than to shoot her in the back in front of her best friend driving in heavy traffic in Mid-Atlanta.
Mr. Crane, I'm not going to lie to you. This is something that shocked us because that very argument, which was articulated by the defense and which we talked about here, was the big argument here. And I have to imagine the jurors were thinking about that because, again, if you're going to intentionally kill your wife, why would you do it in this manner? And you said it really well, but the question was, it's so hard to know what the jurors were thinking until after they delivered their verdict, and we kind of got a sense of it. But what were you thinking about during the jury deliberations? Because they were taking a long time, and yesterday it appeared that they were going to be deadlocked and a mistrial was going to happen.
Well, they took 5 days, and during the time they were out, they only asked a handful of questions to Judge Me. One of them was, can we find guilty on the witness tampering charge and not guilty on all the other charges? The answer to that, of course, was yes. So that plus the deadlock that was around noontime yesterday led a lot of folks to believe that Mr. McIver might be acquitted, at least of the more serious charges. But again, seeing the weight of the evidence, there were 82 witnesses that testified at trial, and even knowing Tex myself for more than 30 years, there were a lot of things I learned about his personal finances, where he was in his law career, that I didn't know even after the shooting. So the jury obviously didn't also get the full context of the man. And it's easy to second-guess the defense on the backside like this, but there are a lot of things I would have tried to introduce that will perhaps come in the sentencing when character witnesses are brought in to talk about why those of us who know Tex have such a connect here. Knowing him as a person, knowing him as a leader, knowing him as a philanthropist and a lawyer, that he made these choices after the trial, like the auction, that didn't make sense and built up to a pattern that caused people to see someone who wasn't acting like an innocent man.
Well, your testimony was very interesting to watch because really what came down was that big issue of contention between when you decided to help Tex McIver and try to say, listen, let's try to understand what happened here. And the big issue was that Black Lives Matter comment, right? When he tried to make that comment, and then there was an issue of trying to retract that comment. And you said on the stand, I wasn't going to put my reputation at risk. I wasn't going to lie. But you said there were certain things that just weren't adding up when you were looking at the whole case. And as you just said, the jurors were getting a fuller picture of this man, maybe not a complete picture, but they were starting to learn a little bit more about what happened. So was there something during the course of the trial that you were surprised to learn about Tex McIver?
I did not know that McIver was no longer an equity partner of his law firm. I did not know that his finances were in such bad position that he was actually a few $1,000s in the red on the day of the shooting. I did not know that he'd borrowed $600,000 from Diane McIver or previously $350,000 for Diane McIver, that there was a dispute over the ownership of the ranch, a number of things that were well documented and not disputed by the defense that were presented in evidence that painted a pretty clear picture of financial distress and Tex being somewhat dependent on Diane McIver, his wife, for the financing of their life. Those things and other things that were told to me. As it relates to the Black Lives Matter comment, in Atlanta, Georgia, the evening prior to the tragic accident, the shooting, while they were driving back from County Lake, there were 3 Black Lives Matter protests in Atlanta, one across the street from their condominium, one in downtown Atlanta, and one at the City of Atlanta jail. Well covered by local media, also Fox News and CNN. Tex McIver's a news junkie. Those impressions were fresh on his mind when they got off of the interstate. Those familiar with Atlanta, I-20 and the downtown connector can often back up on the weekends, but it was a parking lot. So when they got off at Edgewood Avenue and drove down and turned left going near Grady Hospital, there's an overpass that sometimes operates, particularly in colder months, as a homeless village underneath the overpass. He indicated that he saw people there, but he wasn't clear, and he's relating this to me, and I was going to act as his spokesperson, and did, to 2 interviews to the newspaper of record, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the Fulton Daily Report. I felt threatened. I didn't know if I was looking at homeless people, I was matter testers, or carjackers, but I felt concerned for our safety, so I asked Diane for the gun that we keep in the console. And didn't argue or dispute the request. She handed him the gun. They continued driving on through Atlanta to try to Buckhead. I had a friend here who just lost his wife, so in the professional setting as a crisis counselor and PR manager, I didn't press him. At the time, didn't make sense to me. Why didn't you call 911? Why did you go to Emory Hospital? There were obviously other hospitals, several choices that were made that, again, perhaps if it was a client, I would have pressed. But this was a friend of almost 40 years, a family advisor and counselor and lawyer to my family's printing businesses. I was trying to help. As rolled forward, and it became apparent that not only what I didn't know, but the questions I didn't press him on allowed us to migrate his story, and that, of course, caused question with the Atlanta Police Department, later with the DA's office, and certainly in the minds of the jury.
Exactly like you said, we can't forget the fact that you were mentioned as one of the charges in the indictment. You became an issue in terms of the DA thought that Tex McIver was trying to influence you. You were one of the witness tampering charges that was eventually dismissed.
Only 3 tampering charges, and 2 of them were dropped by the judge, but I was clear on the stand. I'll be clear with you. I was asked to recant the Black Lives Matter's comments to the media. I was asked to change aspects of this after I'd relayed them to the media outlets, but I explained to Mr. McIver and his attorneys at the time, and multiple times since, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Even if I had a magic wand and could erase pieces of the internet for the AJC and the Fulton Daily Report, that wouldn't undo the hundreds of other news media outlets that covered the story. And I said to Mr. McIver then, and repeatedly, as your story changes or evolves, you're only creating more problems for yourself. On record within days of the accident, or given his Atlanta Police Department statement within days of the accident to the media, well, I would have said as a third-party spokesman who wasn't in that car would not have mattered. And for whatever reasons, they didn't choose to do that.
Were you surprised that the charge was dismissed?
No, I told Clint Rucker, who was the prosecutor, the prosecuting attorney, deputy district attorney, during the interview and lead up with me, that I would be very clear on the stand. I was never asked to shade my story to law enforcement nor any investigative party. There was continuing request made to me up until right before the trial to stop sticking to this story. But again, I make my living doing this, and I'm not going to spoil my integrity or reputation with the journalist I deal with every day, nor perjure myself with sworn testimony that when I knew that I was going to be, when I was subpoenaed and knew I was going to be testifying at trial, which originally would be the 3rd of March and got delayed for a request originally by the defense.
Are you going to maintain contact with Tex McIver as now he goes into the second phase and throughout all this?
Well, obviously they've announced or indicated yesterday they plan to appeal, so I don't know if he'll get an appellate bond or not. I imagine when that's sorted out, whether he's in custody or out on an appellate bond, I will make contact with Tex. There are some things that I'd like to say to him eye to eye, one-to-one. I don't think I'll be a regular visitor if it's at his home or in prison. I would acknowledge to you some of the things I've learned have been disappointing to me, and it's changed the nature of the relationship, including some attacks on my integrity by people paid by his defense team. But we are friends, again, of nearly 40 years. He represented me legally successfully in court. He's been good to my family. I'm not going to walk from the man.
Is there a part of you that feels, I regret even getting involved in this in the first place?
There's a no good deed goes unpunished aspect of this in my brain, yes, that if I had said no or not offered myself in pro bono service to begin, a very significant distraction in my life for the last year and a half wouldn't have been there. But again, I'm professionally trained, both as a journalist previously and recently as his manager. I'm one of those, and I'm not putting myself out there as a crisis responder in the sense of being in run a police or fire personnel. But when someone's reputation is on fire or a friend of mine is in crisis, I go to them to help them. I don't run in the opposite direction. And unfortunately, a lot of people do the opposite of that.
So there's so many interesting parts about this case, like you explained, and I know I don't have that much time, so I want to ask you one last question. Why do you think this case got so much attention? I mean, we were covering it gavel to gavel. We covered it every minute. Other news outlets were focused upon it. What do you think about this case drew so much attention?
Well, there was the Peyton Pace aspect of it, that you had a very affluent corporate executive and McGuire husband highly placed in, if you will, Atlanta political society in Georgia. Tex is the vice chairman of the State Board of Elections. It was on the American Bar Association's gun safety panel. And then you had the belief that there was initially selective prosecution and the police was giving favoritism in going easy on Tex McIver, and a considerable amount, not just local, of regional and national news media attention. The Black Lives Matter issue gave a hook, caused the London Daily Mail and the Yomiuri Shimbun in Tokyo to cover this case. And in the trial during the days, in addition to Law and Crime, there were representatives at NBC Dateline and some of the network news magazines that have been there essentially at all the pretrial depositions, all of the pretrial evidence here, and they fed an audience. And as I understand, the spike in Law and Crime's viewing on the web was heavy in this trial, as it will be during others, but it had enough salacious aspects and strong prosecution and defense attorneys that it drew a lot of attention.
Well, I can guarantee you our audience just spiked from this interview as well, because a lot of people wanted to hear from you because you were such an integral part about this case. So, Mr. Crane, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.